3A, Part 3. You will be able to explain Pavio's dual code theory and its role in working and long-term memory. You will also be able to explain different parts of memory and how they are integrated in Badalay's model of learning. And you will define selection, organization, and integration cognitive processes, and how instructional technology can be used to integrate words and pictures effectively. In the previous presentation, we covered different types of memory: sensory, working, and long-term memory, and those were all associated with the information processing theory. So now we're going to move one row down on the worksheet and look at Pavio's dual coding theory. Within each type of memory, we have separate visual and verbal memory channels. The multimedia principle states that words and images are more effective for learning when they're together than when either are alone, and it makes sense when you think about two separate memories. Pavio's research found separate memory channels for images and words. Two memory channels increase memory twofold, and that facilitates the incidence of transfer. Okay, and we're going to move down one more to the last row on the worksheet, and this is the row that contains Badalay's episodic buffer as well as Mayer's multimedia theory. Badalay's episodic buffer is very interesting because it describes an episodic memory in working memory and its function in integrating words and images. The little designer says, work really hard to make words and pictures go together so well that they are almost one thought. So 1 + 1 = 1. The episodic buffer will appreciate your work. Let's step through Badalay's model, which explains how pictures and words travel through memory. On the next page, you'll see these symbols. They are representing activated memory. Notice the growing activation, which represents thought. Sensory experiences produce permanent changes in the central nervous system. These permanent changes to the central nervous system are referred to as long-term memory. Meaningful learning is based on relating new concepts to students' prior knowledge. These are all the different types of information. New concepts presented as verbal messages, printed messages, and visual images are transformed by the sensory organs, the ears and eyes, into a pattern of biochemical activity that we refer to as sensation. Sensory activity is then preserved over a brief period of time by a sensory memory system. The patterns of activity in the sensory memory system in turn activate previously experienced patterns of activity. So long-term memory and then episodic memory integrates this, and the patterns of activity activated by instruction are now available for conscious control. This takes place in the episodic buffer, which is in working memory. The episodic buffer is important because the optimal integration of words and images creates meaning. As designers, we try to help the episodic buffer by integrating words and images in our instructional messages. 2 of Mayer's 7 multimedia principles are especially relevant for designing word and image combinations. One is the multimedia principle. To use words and pictures, the combination is more powerful than words alone or pictures alone. And second, the temporal contiguity effect, where you show words and pictures at the same time. Showing a picture after showing a word is not as effective as showing the picture and the word together. Mayer also describes 3 cognitive processes involved in transfer. These include selection, organization, and integration, which are the yellow boxes. Selection describes processes involved in sensory memory. Organization describes processes involved in working memory, and integration describes processes involved in long-term memory. As designers, we facilitate cognitive processes using 3 design principles. For selection, we make important information stand out. When we're working on organization, we're trying to make the relative status of information clear. And when we're working to improve integration, we are attempting to help learners see the big picture. Okay, again, I've shown you this diagram several times, but you help a learner select information by helping them focus on what is really important. You help them organize information by chunking information into meaningful units, by sequencing information, by showing relationships between elements. Organization strategies help your learners read your image. We also facilitate learner integration by helping learners see the big picture and understanding how elements fit within the big picture. You can help learners integrate by clarifying how parts relate to the whole. So let's look at some examples of selection. Selection is the idea of making important information stand out. If you were teaching future doctors and nurses to understand the heart and all of its parts, you'd want the images on the right, the line drawings. Showing the photograph would obscure the details. So that's why you see the 2 little arrows pointing down on the line drawings. If, however, you were teaching medical students heart surgery, you'd want to use realistic images and gradually move towards live patients. Let's look at organization, which is the whole idea of making relative status of information elements clear. In the original image, you see 2 bikers, but their relative status is not really clear. One is going one way, the other's going the other way. Therefore, pointing out the angle of their backs is not quite as effective as in this revised image where they're both facing the same direction and you can compare the relative status of each. Integration is helping learners see the big picture, and I think a screenplay is the best example of showing the power of integration. Screenplays make their authors lots of money. And what they basically are is integrated. It's the power of integration. The screenplay shows the movie directors what is happening and what is happening on the screen with what is being said. So you see visual images integrated with words. And here's an image that does speak 1,000 words. And these are salaries for screenplays. So, for example, this movie, The Sixth Sense, earned its writer $5 million and then set the stage for another $5 million for a different movie. And screenplays, as we've just learned, are basically the integration principle. You're showing whoever is reading it what is happening, what's being said, and what is happening. What are people seeing and what are people hearing? And the 2 are integrated. When images and words are processed simultaneously, the danger of extraneous load is reduced. And that's the whole idea of separating words in space and time from the images. It just creates confusion because you have 1 plus 1. Instead of it equaling 1, which is one message, it ends up meaning a third entirely unanticipated message. So we learned that the multimedia principle explains that transfer of information to long-term memory is enhanced when words and images are combined effectively. This is based on Pavio's research finding separate memory channels. 2 memory channels increase memory 2-fold. Words and images, however, must be carefully integrated to impact transfer. Baddeley's model of memory is the most robust model, explaining how words and images are stored and how they are also integrated. Mayer describes 3 cognitive processes involved in transfer: selection, organization, and integration. Selection describes processes involved in sensory memory. Organization describes processes involved in working memory. And integration describes processes involved in long-term memory. Instructional technology can be used to integrate words and images effectively during selection, organization, and integration processes.